Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a truly fascinating idea, how the very rooms we learn in actually physically shape our developing brains. Think back to the classrooms of your youth. The way the desks were arranged, the height of the windows, the specific colors on the walls, none of that was an accident. Today, we are going to explore the hidden architecture of education. Picture your absolute earliest classroom memory. You probably remember the tiny chairs, right? The colorful rugs, the specific layout of the room. Well, let's dive into a pretty provocative question. What if that physical space was actively instructing you, guiding your behavior, and wiring your brain, all without uttering a single word? We've got a great roadmap today. We'll start with the room as a teacher, move into the pioneers of play, unpack the constructivistic ecosystem, look at designing for the senses, and wrap up with the neuroscience of space. Let's jump right in. Section 1. The room as a teacher, invisible forces. Here's the crucial takeaway. Early classrooms aren't just a random hodgepodge of toys. Not at all. They are deeply intentional spaces reflecting very specific educational philosophies. Every single design choice, from exactly where a bookshelf is placed to the literal texture of the floor beneath a kid's feet, is a physically built manifestation of how a particular theorist believed children actually grow and learn. It's quite literally philosophy made into wood, glass, and fabric. Moving on to Section 2. Pioneers of play, shattering traditions. When you look back, this historical shift was incredibly rapid and absolutely radical. Back in 1837, Friedrich Froebel established the first kindergarten, which literally translates to children's garden. He viewed children as growing plants, so he entirely scrapped rigid, passive seating in favor of open play spaces and actual gardens. Then, in the early 1900s, Maria Montessori steps in to pioneer the prepared environment. And shortly after that, John Dewey completely flipped the script again by creating the classroom laboratory. Maria Montessori's foundational concept is just brilliant. She believed young children possess an absorbent mind. Because of that, she positioned the physical, spatial organization of a room as a primary tool for developing a child's concentration. The room itself had to be perfectly, meticulously prepared, because the child was going to absorb its structure and its logic directly into their developing brain through self-directed activity. So visualize literally shrinking the adult world down to child size. That's exactly what Montessori did. By introducing child-scaled furniture and accessible, low shelving, kids didn't have to ask an adult to hand them something. They could just get it themselves. These highly intentional design choices, combined with a strict emphasis on order and beautiful, self-correcting sensory materials, were explicitly meant to build executive function and physical independence. The environment itself was teaching them how to be autonomous. Building right on that momentum, John Dewey viewed education as a deeply social process. So he took things a step further and actually tore out those bolted-down desks completely. He transformed rooms into hands-on community workspaces, laboratories, and art studios. For Dewey, movement, social collaboration, and physical interaction, they weren't distractions from learning, they were the central mechanisms of learning itself. All right, Section 3, the constructivist ecosystem, building knowledge. Enter the heavy hitters of constructivism, Jean Piaget and Lev Vygotsky. Imagine tearing down traditional walls to create spaces specifically tailored to their theories. Piaget argued that children construct knowledge by physically acting on their environment. So spaces needed diverse, tactile materials to provoke what he called cognitive conflict. Basically, challenges that force the brain to build new schemas. Vygotsky, on the other hand, was all about social learning. This meant the spatial design absolutely had to provide mixed-stage interaction zones and collaborative small group spaces to facilitate peer scaffolding. We aren't talking about static classrooms anymore. These were dynamic, living ecosystems. And that brings us to Loris Malaguzzi, the founder of the Reggio Emilia approach. He did something beautiful here. He elevated the physical room itself to the status of a teacher. In his framework, the adults are the first teacher, the child's peers are the second, and the physical environment, that's the third teacher. He essentially made the space an active, explicit pedagogical partner in the learning process. So what does this pedagogical partner actually look like spatially? We'll think abundant natural light and transparent glass partitions that create this incredible sense of openness and community. Malaguzzi's spaces feature central gathering places called piazzas and open-ended art studios known as ateliers. And what's deeply compelling is how the walls are treated as dynamic canvases for pedagogical documentation. They actively display the children's work, honoring what Malaguzzi beautifully called the child's 100 languages of expression. If we take a step back and look at this architectural journey, the evolution is crystal clear. We go from Froebel's nature-centric gardens over to Montessori's child-scaled independence, into Dewey's active workshops, through the tactile peer learning of Piaget and Vygotsky, all the way to Malaguzzi's luminous transparent spaces. It's a truly profound architectural evolution.
Section 4. Designing for the senses, protecting the child.
Let's view sensory architecture through the lens of Rudolf Steiner's Waldorf pedagogy. He believed that early childhood is a time of immense subconscious sensory absorption, so his spatial principles are specifically designed to actively protect the child. His layouts strongly favor organic curves and natural timber, intentionally avoiding rigid right angles and synthetic materials. Plus, the spaces feature minimally processed, unformed materials. Think plain wool, tree bark, or just simple wooden blocks, instead of hyper-detailed plastic toys. This gently prompts the kid's mind to imaginatively transform the object. Finally, he uses warm, muted color palettes to shield young children from hyperstimulation and support their self-regulation. Now, check out the stark contrast in spatial power dynamics here. The old industrial legacy of the 19th century was basically a factory floor. We're talking row seating, elevated teacher podiums, and high windows designed strictly for compliance and centralized surveillance. Compare that directly to a democratic spatial reorganization. By eliminating a central teacher desk, you completely remove that hierarchical authority, turning the educator into a collaborative co-investigator. And by swapping out generic commercial posters for local artifacts and family photos, the room instantly transforms into a culturally responsive, highly inclusive space. Finally, Section 5, the neuroscience of space, architecture and biology. This is where it gets really cool, because modern neuroscience is actually proving what a lot of those early theorists only suspected. It's amazing how simple architecture literally alters neural processing. Just look at scale and proportion. Elevated, dynamic ceiling heights literally spark expansive, abstract thinking in the brain. Conversely, low, semi-enclosed alcoves give kids necessary emotional security and allow for really deep focus. The very dimensions of the room act like a dial, tuning the brain's cognitive state. We're also seeing the architectural application of proprioceptive pathways, incorporating diverse physical terrain, things like indoor ramps, varied floor textures, or low balance beams. These aren't just there for play or to let kids burn off energy. Neurobiology shows us that navigating these physical challenges actively stimulates a child's spatial memory and helps build executive function. The body's physical movement through space is just inextricably linked to how the brain develops. And all of this leads us to the core scientific foundation, embodied cognition. Early cognitive structures develop in direct synergy with motor planning, sensory processing, and spatial navigation. Our brains don't develop in a vacuum, right? They develop in a room. So I'll leave you with this one final, pretty striking question to think about. Since our brains develop in such direct synergy with spatial navigation, how might we radically redesign the spaces you inhabit today to better shape your tomorrow?